We've got this first session here, Key Principles and Roles of Private Equity, Introduction to Private Equity. So where do we start? What's on the menu for this little section? We've got a high-level review of the market for private equity. We're going to talk about how private equity works, basically, and also how buyouts work. And this is a chance to unpack any jargon that you guys haven't seen. Please interrupt and pitch in. The first thing is a space in your packs here for thinking about, talking about, writing some notes on how private equity firms make money. Matt, have you got any thoughts? How do private equity firms make money?
Buy low, sell high.
Buy low, sell high. Buy low, sell high. David, buy low, sell high? Strip out as much cash as possible along the business. Let's talk about that. I think buy low, sell high is probably... Buy low, sell high is probably about as accurate a description as we can get. What are they going to do? Here's the space in your packs here. You've got some space to write this. Buy low. Let's imagine that... I'll tell you what, let's use an analogy to start with. Buy low. We're thinking about an analogy between what private equity firms do and real life. Ollie, in the olden days, you could buy a house and expect to sell it in a little while and maybe make some money on that house, yeah? What's the property market doing at the moment, do you think? Flagging, isn't it? So I'm not sure that this is a good analogy. What's the market for buying and selling businesses doing at the moment? Well, there's been a lot of uncertainty, hasn't there? So maybe it is a good analogy to use. But in the olden days, what you could have done is bought a flat in London. I don't know how much you'd pay nowadays, but perhaps a long time ago when I first came to London, you could buy a flat probably for £100,000. Wouldn't probably even get you the front door now, would it? But here we go. Let's imagine we're buying a flat for £100,000, or we're buying a business for 100 million, or whatever our valuation is. And we're going to hope to do what Matt's suggesting we would do: buy low, sell high. So Ollie, let's imagine that we'd sold that business or that flat. That's what we're trying to do with private equity, trying to buy low, sell high. That's probably the best description that we could have of it. But let's learn about some things which are specific to private equity. Again, a little test for my guys this morning. Over what kind of time frame? You might have heard this before. David, I'll ask you, what sort of time frame would private equity be expecting to sell over? You've heard that phrase. They often talk about a 3 to 5 year time horizon. Okay, so that's one of the things they're looking to do, is turn these businesses around quite quickly, as well as making sure we know about time frames. What's affecting that, or what's happening to that time frame? This is the olden days, Ollie, that we're talking about here. The olden days, buy low, sell high. It all works according to plan. You sell over that 3 to 5 year horizon. David, what's happening at the moment, do you think, to that time horizon? The 3 to 5 years is becoming 5 plus. That's absolutely right. The time frame for exits is extending, isn't it? Is extending. And before we started the session, we were talking about some of the private equity firms that we know, the ones that might, if we're lucky, take us to the races or those track days, which is a great thing. But thinking about those private equity firms, what is the impact of that time frame slipping for them and their business, do you think? What's the impact of that? It makes it much harder for them to get their return, isn't it? Okay, one of the things we'll talk about in this session is private equity fees and how they earn their money, but it's harder for them to get a return. Matt knows this. It's all about buying low, selling high. It's all about that. But of course, if those time frames are being pushed out, it's much harder for private equity to get their returns. Ollie, what do you think's been stretching those returns? What's been the main force that's made it difficult for private equity firms to sell in that three?
They probably can't get the valuations that they initially modeled.
They can't get the valuations, absolutely right. Essentially what's happened is the market for buyers of private equity businesses has dried up, isn't it? The market for buyers has dried up. And we know that part of what's caused that is the credit crunch, isn't it? The credit crunch and the lack of debt available for acquisition. Okay, so lack of debt for acquisition. All right, so we're talking about what private equity firms are doing. We know that one of the trends that's affecting the market is the time frames over which they can sell. That's all stretching out because of the credit crunch, because of the lack of availability of debt. Let's think about some other things that are affecting private equity. I'll tell you what we could do is we could look quickly at the impact of leverage. And I know I've got a reasonably advanced group this morning. In the good old days, Ollie, on your London flat, what kind of mortgage could you get if you're buying a flat for 100,000? What percentage of that price could you? 90% mortgage, on the basis that you would be a good safe bet for the bank, and you'd be a good risk, and I'd lend you 90% of that 100,000. That's a bit harder today, isn't it? And I've got to be honest, in the good old days for companies, I don't think you could ever have got a 90% mortgage on a company. Pre-credit crunch, Matt, what kind of levels of debt might you get into a buyout? You're getting 5 or 6 times EBITDA. In terms of percentage, 60 or 70%, 60 to 70%, and that's quite difficult. Well, I tell you what, I agree with you. I think pre-credit crunch, you could probably get 60 or 70% of the purchase price as debt. But just to make the numbers simple, let's imagine that we had a very friendly bank in the old days. They're not going to lend us 90%, Ollie, but they're going to lend us, let's say, 80%. And we know that's unrealistic, especially in today's market, but let's imagine we could get 80% of that price by way of debt. This is not a trick question. Ollie, when we come to sell, again in the good old days in our 3 to 5 years, what we're going to have to do is pay off that debt. Maybe we've paid off a little bit along the way, but let's assume that the business was growing and it needed more debt along the way, perhaps to fund working capital. Let's imagine, just to keep the numbers simple, not a quick trick question, once we sell, repay the debt, Ollie, what's our profit? If you like, what are our net proceeds on that little deal? Yeah, so let's have a look at it. So what we've done is we've taken our 20 that we've put in. So if you like, the 20 was your deposit on your flat in London. Okay, so we raised 80 in debt. Actually, we could make this 140, just to make sure we don't get too confused with the numbers. We sell at 140, pay off the 80, so we've turned our 20 into 60. Okay?